Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. I'm Daita Sergi, Education Programs Manager for ASHI, and I'll be the moderator today. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to our first webinar in 2019. As many of you know, ASHI's mission is to inspire and catalyze higher education to lead the global sustainability transformation. We are an international association with about 1,000 members spread across more than 20 countries, including Belize and Switzerland. We serve as the professional home for campus sustainability staff, but we offer resources for everyone in higher education. We provide an expansive collection of online resources, networking tools, and educational events, such as today's webinar and an annual conference and expo, which will take place in Spokane, October 27th to the 30th. We currently have a New Year's sale available. If you register by January 31st, we are offering a $50 discount. Also, the call for proposals is open with a deadline of March 8 for most presentation types. The deadline will not be extended, so make sure to check out our websites for these two opportunities. And we hope to see you all in Spokane. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone in the audience is on mute, but please feel free to ask questions or provide comments at any point during the presentation. You can do that by typing your questions or comments in the questions pane in the control panel on your screen. If you have additional questions, please email them to education@ashi.org and we will get back to you. At the end of the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback regarding today's presentation. We take your suggestions into account when planning for future webinars, so please do provide this feedback. Please note this webinar is being recorded. If you experience technical difficulties or have to leave early, you and others can view the recording later. The recording and presentation materials will all be available in the Campus Sustainability Hub after the live broadcast. At this time, I'd like to introduce today's webinar presenters. This webinar is organized in collaboration with Lucid, one of ASHI's business partners. Vladi Shanturov is a thought leader and innovator in the field of building IoT and data-driven building operations. As the co-founder and VP of Product Solutions at Lucid, Vladi has spent over 15 years helping organizations leverage building data to improve their operations. Justin Owen is the Energy Manager at Weber State University, where he oversees the energy and building automation teams. He manages Weber's revolving green fund, pursues energy rebates, manages energy upgrades to HVAC and lighting system, and oversees the university's renewable efforts. More information about the presenters is found on the ASHI website under this webinar listing. It is my pleasure to welcome all attendees and thank you for joining us today. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to Vladi to get us started.
Thank you so much, and thank you guys for joining. We're excited to have you here today, and we're discussing a topic which is I think relevant and interesting for all of us. We obviously spend a lot of time looking at how we can optimize building performance at a portfolio scale, at the building scale, at the system level scale. We're looking at how to use different tools to do that, and obviously energy information management systems, EMIS, is a category of technology solutions that allow us to use data to drive decisions to then optimize performance. And oftentimes the critical question is, well, how do I pay for it? Or even if I'm convinced in the value and ROI, it's difficult for me to go and get funding. It's difficult for me to go and get my stakeholders engaged so they can improve the deployment of a system like this. And so today the topic is really having a conversation about how do we break down some of these barriers and how do we provide concrete examples and steps that allow you to justify a deployment and justify the deployment of a system that takes you to data-driven efficiency. And so just before we kick off, we wanted to run a quick poll. It'd be super helpful to just know where each of you are on your own personal journey as far as the deployment of a energy information management system and the use of such a system. So we'll bring up a little poll that's going to show on your screen. And if you can provide your input, that will be super helpful. And then we'll quickly go through the results and see what people respond.
Thank you, Vladi. So the poll is going on now, and we'll have it open for a few more seconds to give everyone a chance to provide an answer. All right, so let's see the results. It shows that 75% of respondents have little or no budget today, but would like to get some creative ideas. 19% have a decent budget but are looking for a solution, and only 6% have an EMIS installed and are looking for more budget to expand. Back to you, Vladi.
Appreciate it. So that's super helpful just to know what kind of point we're starting at, and we go through the conversation with Justin. So as far as agenda, this is what we want to cover. We did introductions. I'm really excited to have Justin present to us on how Weber State has deployed, really, as he said in an earlier conversation, the intersection of computer science, mechanical engineering, and electrical engineering, and how they've used data to uncover very substantial savings, but also how they've gotten creative about how they can use funds and be able to reinvest over time in efficiency measures. They've been a long time Lucid customer, and we worked with them for a number of years, and so very, very excited to have them here today. I also have an example I want to share from another university customer, because they've zoomed out and they've created a perspective that's allowed the IT group and the larger body of decision makers to really see the need for deploying such a system. And then we also want to show you a report from the Department of Energy on what kind of payback you can expect. And now that's a critical tool that you can use, and also a tool that we've packaged to make it easy for you to run numbers through, so you can create the justifications. And then of course we'll keep time to get your questions and keep this interactive. So with that, I'd love to hand things over to Justin and get his perspective and what their journey has looked like at Weber State, starting with the deployment of the system and also the success they've seen over the years, and then how they've used that to justify recurring investments and efficiency measures.
Great. Thank you, Vladi. First, I just wanted to say thank you to Aishi for hosting us. This is a topic that I can get a little passionate about. Had some significant disagreements with some people on it, but I do think that Weber's story and results do present a strong case for the funding of these types of programs. So a little more about me. I actually started as a student here at Weber State. That was about 10 years ago. I got my bachelor's degree here, then I went off to graduate school and came back. I've been in my full-time capacity as the energy manager for 3 years. Now, I was fortunate to learn and report to the person who got all of this stuff going. So I wasn't necessarily here during a lot of the negotiations that I'll be mentioning, but I do have the full story of how we got where we are at Weber State. Now, about the same time I started as a student, Weber made this commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050. And I'm sure a lot of the people listening are familiar with the ACU PCC. We signed that, as did several other institutions in the state. And it fell to my predecessor to kind of figure out how to do that. How do we get the information? How do we get the money? And how do we make this thing grow over time so we can actually get to our goal? Because commitments, while I do think there's a lot of value in setting goals, if you don't have a path to that goal, then there's a problem. So a little more about Weber State. We're not the most famous school in Utah. If there's any basketball fans, Damian Lillard from the Portland Trailblazers is probably our biggest claim to fame. We have about 27,000 students. We have multiple campuses. We have about 1,500 FTEs and about 3 million square feet of space. Now, one of the ways that we are different is we are primarily a commuter school. We have a strong cohort of non-traditional students on campus. So a lot of people are coming to class in the morning. I know when I was going to school, I worked 1, 2, and sometimes 3 part-time jobs to fund my studies. So they're coming to school in the morning and they're going to work in the afternoon, or vice versa. They're working during the day and attending some of our night classes. Now while that's not particularly the focus of the webinar today, that does present some unique challenges in terms of Scope 3 emissions associated with commuting. So as far as operations are concerned, our sustainability and energy group is housed within facilities, which gives us a lot of interesting connections and a lot of interesting opportunities. To give you an idea of the scale of how much energy we're using every year, our utility budget, and I say budget with an asterisk, because we are saving substantial money off of that budget, but we are still budgeting this much money, and I'll explain why in a moment. About $4.5 million a year. Currently, we're consuming about 27 million kilowatt hours, and we annually, and we're consuming about 100,000 decatherms of natural gas. Now, underlying everything that I'm going to go over today is this idea that in order to control your energy use, you have to know what's going on in your buildings, okay? And one of the ways you can do that, and it's very beneficial, is to have an energy management information system. So one of the first things we did at Weber State, this was back probably in about 2010, 2011, is we decided we wanted to be metered for every utility at every building, okay? So we've got electricity, natural gas, steam, chilled water, condenser water, domestic water. Right now, we're doing a big push on irrigation, which is a little different in Utah. We have this thing called secondary water that's not treated that we use for irrigation. It comes through a different distribution system, has different meters. So in order to get to this carbon neutral goal, one of the first big questions we had is, okay, where are we consuming energy? What are we doing with our campus? How are our buildings scheduled? Where are the low-hanging fruit as far as energy conservation measures? So I'm gonna start out a little differently than I usually do. I'm gonna start out by showing the results of our efforts first, and then I'm gonna get into the details of particularly how do we fund all of this stuff. So this is a graph. Remember, I mentioned our utility budget is $4.5 million a year. Give or take, it's going up over time. This is a graph of our annual utility savings. Okay, so this is money we are saving by doing energy conservation measures, lighting upgrades, commissioning, renewables. We have a very broad scope in terms of our energy work. What I want to point out on this graph is this number is going up over time, and every dollar that we save on energy gets reinvested into more energy projects. The other result of the things I'm going to talk about today is our carbon emissions. Now, I live in scope 1 and scope 2. You'll notice our biggest decrease on this graph has actually been in our scope 2. We're down about 57% in our scope 2 emissions. Scope 1, I believe, is down about 25%. Scope 3 for us, as I mentioned, is very difficult. About 88% of our faculty, staff, and students arrive here in a single occupancy vehicle. So that's a whole different discussion. But the main 2 points I want to drive home from these 2 slides is there's a trend on our energy savings. It's going up over time, and there's a trend down over time of our carbon emissions, which means we have a path to this goal. Now, I'm not going to get into the technical details of our engineering approach to carbon neutrality, but I am going to talk a lot about how we finance these things. So I might be mistaken on this, but I feel like as far as the penetration of this idea of energy efficiency generating return, I think most people can understand that. I think most people have homes. They pay their utility bills. Sometimes they're really expensive. They see different costs in the winter and the summer with natural gas and electricity. And I think generally people understand that. Now that's just that's my impression, and I might be mistaken. When you get to the campus level, things become much more complicated. And one of the things you can do when you're getting into this world, and it is one thing we did here at Weber State, is have some sort of energy audit for your campus, okay? There's different levels. You can do level 1, level 2, level 3. And the idea is you're going through your campus and you're identifying all of these energy conservation measures. Just for an idea, if anybody's not familiar with this, the audit for the report for the audit for our initial energy audit is about 3,000 pages, right? So there's a lot of information there. Where things can get difficult is when you're talking to the financial people at your university. Okay, a lot of them might not really be on board with your sustainability initiatives. They might be on board, but they might have other commitments. There might be other issues that are at play that we don't even consider when we're talking about the sustainability and the energy realm. Things that have to happen in order for the university to continue its operations, right? People have to get paid, bills have to be paid, and so on. So I want to pose a hypothetical, and this is kind of a rhetorical hypothetical. Let's say I'm in my position and I spend a year doing all of these great energy projects. Here at Weber State, we do a lot of ground source heat pump systems. So let's say I do one of those and I put in a solar array, and I've got my electricians that work for me, and they're always upgrading lighting, and I do some scheduling. And I feel like I've done really good energy work during the past year. I go to the administration at the end of the year and I claim, I have my spreadsheets and I've done weather normalization and I know what utility rates, which buildings are on, and I know where all my demand curves are at. And I've got all these comparisons to my baseline and my benchmarks. There's all this work that's gone into my energy savings. And I go to the administration and I say to our VP, I saved you $500,000 this year. And he looks at his accountants and they say, well, there's only $300,000 in the utility account. What happens then? So there could be a number of problems here. It could have been a particularly bad winter. Maybe one of my commissioning projects really missed some things and buildings aren't operating how I think they are. But at least in my experience, our accountants and our administration, they don't really want to hear it. They don't really care that there was a really cold winter last year. All they see is there's $300,000. I'm asking for $500,000. And in their eyes, that creates a credibility problem. So one of the key questions that I think needs to be posed when you're looking for funding for things like an energy management information system, the first one, who manages your utility account? Who's actually paying the bills? For us at Weber State, we have an entire accounting division, and there's one accountant there, and her primary purpose, her primary job duty is to pay the utility bills. She's getting water bills, natural gas bills, electricity bills, and just making sure the university pays them in time. So that's, in my mind, question number one. Who's actually paying those bills? And the reason that question is important is because that's where energy savings are realized. They are realized in the utility bills. So ideally, your accountant should be paying the bills, and whoever's doing your energy savings analysis, whether that's somebody in-house, somebody through an ESCO, or however you elect to do it, is also looking at those utility bills and making sure that the dollars line up. So I have this spreadsheet, and it's giant, for every utility bill, for every building, water, natural gas, electricity. I go through every month and I compare our actual spending to our baseline, and then I can go to the accountants and say, okay, under our baseline, under a business as usual scenario, we would have spent $5,000, but we only spent $4,000, so we've realized $1,000 in savings. The next question that comes to mind for me when we're talking about this kind of stuff is, how is your utility bill adjusted year by year? Anecdotally, for me here in Utah, our electric rates over the past several years have been more or less flat. We're talking variations of less than 0.5%. Our natural gas costs are not the cost, the rates are going up 3 to 4%. Our water rates, which is a very hot topic here in the West, are going up about 10% every year. So that's something, when you're having the energy savings discussion, can hurt you if you haven't thought about it beforehand. Rates can go up. Campuses can increase in size, and therefore costs can increase. Space functions can change. A good example of that for us is a classroom getting changed into a computer lab. Well, that's obviously going to consume a lot more energy. So how does that factor into how you calculate your energy savings? And then finally, the last thing that's going to affect your utility costs is weather. If you have a particularly hot summer or cold winter, that's going to change things. Now, I will say that for us here at Weber State, I do not weather normalize our energy savings. And a lot of energy engineers kind of raise their eyebrows when they look at me. And the reason they do that is because if I were to weather normalize, they'd see my numbers would look better. But I found that in our discussions and our negotiations with our administration, that's not what they want to see. They want to see dollars in the account. The final question that I think needs to be addressed is what's going to happen to energy savings. And this is something where Weber has come up with what I believe is an excellent model. I've seen all sorts of different ideas on this. I've seen some agreements where 75% of the energy savings go back to the energy program, 25% go back to the general fund. I've seen a 50-50 split. I've seen 100% go back to energy savings. I've seen, we have a local school district here that's building net zero buildings, and most of the dollars they save on their energy bills actually go back to their classroom. Okay, so a lot of that negotiation, I think, depends on what the values of your administration are and where they see that money going. Okay, so as far as where can you get your money, there's several options that I think are good. I think this slide is, I kind of laid it out as a good, better, best scenario. And most of you are probably already familiar with these. Number one, local utilities offer rebates, okay? So anytime you do a lighting project, you go to your local electric utility, do some energy analysis, and they can provide some incentive. Now, rebates are not enough to fund an energy program on their own, but they are a good source of supplemental cash flow. I pursue them aggressively. I'm on a first name basis with several people from our utilities because they know that Weber's doing all of this work. Along those same lines, there are grants available. Sometimes these are at the federal level, sometimes they're at the state level, sometimes they're at the utility level. There's some research that has to be done there. And I'm trying to remember the name of the Desire database. The Desire database is, so that's DSIRE. I think they're out of North Carolina, but they have this great effort where they are accumulating all of this data on what's available in every state across the country. And then, the third option here under the good is to just ask for money. I do not see this as a long-term solution. I see this as more as a one-time funding or a kickstart kind of option. At least for us here in Utah, and I'm not sure how operations and maintenance dollars work elsewhere, it is very difficult for us to sell an energy project on a capital development list. Sometimes those funds can work kind of in a cooperative way, and they can add to what our energy dollars are doing. But as far as a sustainable funding source, relying on one person in your administration can be dangerous because you never know who's coming next. The next option is to go through an energy services company. There's a number of these across the nation that will come to your campus, do an energy audit for you, and then basically act as a general contractor on all of the energy conservation measures. You'll have some sort of contract about what happens to the energy savings, how they're being paid, and so on. Excuse me. The issue that we had with this at Weber State when we did it was we ran the numbers, and it basically came up, there was a 40% markup for the work that was going to be done. And, coming out of facilities like we have, we looked at our in-house technicians and said, you know what? We have a lot of this in-house expertise. We have HVAC people, we have electricians, we have controls people. Let's do this ourselves. Now, what I view as at least in my opinion, the best source of funding for this kind of thing is to borrow money. Now, there's a number of ways you can do that. Here in Utah, for example, we have a program that's a zero interest loan program for energy projects, and that's run through our state energy office. But what I want to spend the rest of my time focusing on is borrowing from yourself, borrowing from your institution. Weber State has what we call an internal revolving loan fund. So when my predecessor ran through the energy audit and he found all of that markup, at the time he had a couple $100,000 in his account that were from energy rebates that served as seed money. but he quickly recognized the need for a sustainable source of funding. So the binders he put together are kind of ridiculous. It's like 100 pounds of paper. But the whole idea there was to come up with a sustainable source of funding that would kind of stand the test of time and also be a win-win both for the energy people, for our carbon neutral goal, and for our financial people. So he went and talked to our administrators, and they basically came to this agreement that, okay, we have this thing we call our cash management pool. Typically, we invest that in it's called, here in Utah, it's called the Public Service Investment Fund, just so it's doing something while we wait to use this money. We've got this building that's come up that we're funded for, but the contract's not over, so we're not going to pay out yet. We have $10 million sitting here. Let's do something with it, right? So we looked at what we thought we could generate as a return in energy and compared it to the return that was coming out of the Public Service Investment Fund, and came to this idea that, okay, let us borrow from the university's general cash pool. Set aside $5 million, which is large. I realize that. Set aside $5 million that you'd normally be putting in the Public Service Investment Fund. Instead, let me put that into energy projects. I will pay off that borrowed debt with my energy savings plus an interest rate of 3%. And that's the kicker. So not only are we funding our energy projects, and we're funding them at a scale that allows us to grow. Okay, and a good example of this, so this account that I have, our revolving loan fund, it's got really big spikes and really big deep troughs, right? I will do a large project, and then I'll get an influx of money when we do our energy savings transfer at the end of the year. Now, at first, we were pursuing a lot more low-hanging fruit as far as energy projects were concerned. Now we're kind of into the longer game where, if I want to do if I want to do a large solar array and the simple payback is in the 20-year range, well, that means my ROI is 5%, which is greater than this interest rate. So I'm cash ahead, but I don't have to wait for 20 years for that thing to pay itself off because I'm already leveraging funds from all of these other cumulative energy projects that I've done over time. So there's a snowball effect there, and it's gone quite well with our administration. So every year, it's my job to pay off the debt with our energy savings. Like I mentioned, I do a lot of energy savings calculations based on utility bills. Now, of course, to do so, you have to establish a baseline. For us, we did that over 3 years from 2007 to 2009. And then you also kind of have to have this risk discussion. And by risk, I mean what's going to happen to your energy costs. Those are those 4 things I mentioned earlier: square footage, changes in space, weather, and rates. Now, here at Weber, to make things more palatable on the negotiation side for our administrative people, we basically said, okay, if spaces change, we'll just take an energy hit. We won't factor that into our calculations. It will just hurt us. Same with weather. Now, we want you, the accountants, to increase the utility budget with increases in square footage and increases in rates. We'll talk to the utilities. We'll find out what's going to happen every year. And of course, we're facilities people, so we know when we're getting bigger. I can give you those numbers exactly. And what that has done over time is make that energy savings transfer discussion very, very simple. What started out for us, as we were building our credibility, at the end of the year, we'd go and we'd sit down with our accountants and we'd walk them through how we do our calculations, and it would be several hours. Now that discussion has kind of just evolved into a few emails. How much money is in the energy account? How much are you claiming to have saved? Okay, let's sit down, get signatures, do the funds transfer, and we're done with it. So the take home is that using this approach here at Weber State, we're saving energy. We've decreased our campus demand from 8 megawatts down to 4.5. We are reducing our environmental impact. I mentioned our emissions decrease, and we're generating return for our financial people. Now, we've done this without requesting any additional funding from the state. I actually had 5 state legislators up here, that was probably 2 months ago, who wanted to learn about what we're doing with energy. And that is the point that we drove home. We have done all of this without increasing the number of dollars we request from the state. And I think that is my last slide.
Appreciate it. That is very actionable. Thank you so much for putting this together for the group. I have a couple quick questions as a follow-up, and then I'll kind of dive into my example. Out of curiosity, can you maybe describe the structure of your team and sort of who are all the folks that are involved in working with the data, with the energy management information system? Do you have folks from finance involved, obviously in the energy management and sustainability side? So talk to us a little bit about that, if you
Sure.
could.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we're in facilities. I'm the primary consumer of that data, I think, if I can phrase it that way. Our sustainability group does look at it as well, particularly because they're focused on water. One of the interesting things is there's a good number of faculty who are interested in this information. We have engineering, we have construction management, technology. These kind of faculty will often be interested. One of the other things that our EMIS has really allowed us to do that kind of surprised us is working with electrical engineers on new projects. So we're building a new building, and the electrical engineer wants to size the transformer. He sends me a quick email and he says, "Hey, what's the demand on this building next door?" And I can go look it up and say, "All right, there it is." And it's surprising to me the opportunities that pop up. In fact, just today, about an hour ago, I got an email from a researcher at the University of Singapore who is doing and I don't know details yet because it's brand new, but he's doing some sort of machine learning energy management project and was wondering if we would share our data with him. Now, we also provide this data to the public. So we have a dashboard that's public. It's part of Lucid's platform. We have a number of kiosks in our buildings where people can view real-time energy conservation and energy consumption information. And we use that, in competitions in our residence halls to see, who can consume or who can conserve the most energy. Our sustainability division, which is kind of a sister program to my own, they run a green team program now, and they have 65 different green teams. And part of that is certifying green colleges. So the deans and the chairs of departments are actually interested in this information because they can get green team points for reductions in energy in their building. So there's all sorts of people who are interested in this kind of stuff. And like I said, these things over time, you realize, hey, we could do that, or we could do this, or hey, there's this water consumption. The other interesting thing that we're using it for right now, I mentioned briefly that we're really diving into monitoring our water usage. Here in Utah, we actually have some of the highest per capita water usage in the country, and we're the second driest state, and we've been in denial about that because most of us live next to the mountains, and as the snow melts over the year, we store it in reservoirs and we get our water from it. One of the things that we've been discussing as far as climate resilience is concerned is what's going to happen to our water rates in the future. And so we've really been pushing on water conservation and figuring out where we're using water, where we're saving water, and so on. One of the other things we've been setting up is using Lucid's alerts to tell us when there's a problem, particularly a water leak. One of our biggest problems, we're an old campus. We've been here since the early 1900s, which I know isn't old compared to some of the folks in the Midwest and back east, but for Utah, it's pretty old. We have water lines that nobody knows exists, right? And so if they burst, we're in trouble. Our EMIS, because you're tracking peaks in consumption, can actually tell you about that before a technician or a building occupant even notices it. Did that answer your question? I know I kind of went all over the place there.
No, that's fantastic. That's super helpful, and thank you for pulling all this together. Obviously, you guys have done some pretty incredible work, and I remember even 3 years ago you were presenting on the progress, and even then it seemed impressive. So to continue on that trajectory, is really fantastic. I wanted to continue the conversation and also bring in another example, which is relevant but different, because if you look at how you justify funding, it works a little differently in every organization. And so you guys at Weber have demonstrated a really interesting use case where you've basically established a fund and have borrowed money directly from the school. And that's been very successful. So hopefully other universities can implement that as well. We also have one example from another university customer who manages about 300 buildings, and they're about 5 million square feet of space, very substantial energy spend. And they also similarly set out on a journey to use data to make decisions. They were going after operational improvements of the building, so scheduling, demand management, building system optimization on the HVAC side, but also wanting to leverage behavior efficiency and cultural changes, not just students, but also staff and how the spaces are used. And so what was interesting in the way they approached it is they took a step back and they said, okay, so if you look at our utility expenses, they're growing. And to the point you make, Justin, there's, people don't necessarily want to hear it. They're basically saying, hey, we have growth in student body, we built some space, it makes sense the utility costs are growing. But if you normalize for that, and if you move those variables, the per capita cost was also growing. So whether it was because they were putting additional equipment or buildings or creating more comfort, the cost per student was increasing. And so because of just how large the spend was overall, they knew that they had to go and figure out how to defend the budget and get a budget to deploy a system, because there's just not enough people to look at all the various systems and the various basements and vintages of buildings across the whole campus. And so the approach they took, which is interesting, is they zoomed out and they said, okay, what are we spending overall for operations? And they looked at the overall budget for the school that is focused on a number of different categories. And so utilities was about 8.6% of that budget. And then they went to their IT team and they said, well, what are we spending on software management tools for managing all the various components of our budget? And so the number was fairly substantial. And if they looked at the utility sliver, they were basically only spending at the time about $1,800 a year on software. So they basically had almost no software deployed that was actively used to manage the utility sliver in the budget. And so when they ran the math, effectively, and looked at the $2.8 million of software spend that we're spending to manage the non-utility portion of the budget. They also had 110 full-time managers managing those components of the spend. They basically ran the math and they said that means that we should be spending about $287,000, very specific number, on annual software licenses to allow us to attack that number and shrink it. And so they went to that, they pitched it, and they were actually approved the budget to go and deploy and to demonstrate what they can do with the money and what they can deploy. They were already doing heavy instrumentation, so sub-metering is obviously very important, being able to have the data. But after they went with these projects, they were able to get the data in Building OS. They were able to see some pretty remarkable improvements just in year one. And so in total, in the first year, they saw total savings of about $450,000, which was very impressive. And they reduced electricity use by 8%, hot water demand went down by 8%, gas consumption went down by 7%, and then chilled water use decreased by 5%. Now, a lot of us have to always answer the question, well, what happens to those savings over time? Do they persist? Do I expect to also see additional savings in year 2 and year 3? And so that's been in the past a hard question to answer, because there's definitely low-hanging fruit. I think in year 1 you should expect to see more if you're not doing much as far as active energy management, as far as getting operational savings. There will be a lot of projects that will give you a quick return on investment. And then the question is, what happens in year 2, 3, 4, and beyond? And so the Better Building Institute, which is run by the Department of Energy and operated by our friends at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, have launched a campaign which I highly recommend that all of you follow. It's called the Smart Energy Analytics Campaign. And it's specifically focused on creating a community of organizations who use energy management information systems. And they share best practices, they share results, they share different approaches, and there's co-innovation and co-education that happens within the group. So highly recommend you guys sign up. And there's a lot that all of us can share and learn from each other. And so they went and they studied how different energy management information systems, not just building OS, the entire market of them. If you deploy a system like this, how does it actually affect your savings over the course of the deployment and over your journey? And so here's what the numbers look like, which are really interesting. You basically, on average, again, the customer in question, they performed really well. So they actually got 8% savings in the first year. The median savings in year one are about 4%. Again, there's a range of things that you could be doing. Maybe you've already implemented certain measures and there's less to capture in year one. But then after you operationalize the system, you get experience using it, you get to 11% cumulative savings, median in year two, and year three and year four continues to grow. And so as the group continues to collect more data, we're going to have more data points, and that line is going to continue to extrapolate. And you're also defending and persisting the savings you already implemented, because as we know, buildings drift and they change over time. And so this is a great tool. We actually went ahead and used the data set that the Better Buildings Institute published on this, and they created a web-based tool just to make it easy for you to take this and put your annual energy spend, both in terms of energy and dollars, and be able to come up with a projected ROI. And this is trustworthy ROI. It's numbers you can point to. It's specific data sets that have been run across a very large swath in buildings. If you go back, if you look over the chart, this is combining data from 27 individual organizations, 679 individual buildings, and almost 100 million square feet of commercial space. And so please open up a tab in your browser. We will follow up on an email, but you can even do it now as we're on the webinar. Open a tab in your browser and go to lucidconnects.com/ROI, and you'll get the tool that we built using the data set from the Better Buildings Institute. And so with that, I wanted to open things up for Q&A and make this a little bit more interactive and get your questions and your thoughts on what are some of the strategies that you guys have seen, and also are there things that we didn't cover that you'd love us to spend a little bit more time on?
Thank you so much, Justin and Vladi. We will turn to our audience for Q&A. I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the questions pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. We already have a few questions, but we do have enough time to have more of a conversation. So, Justin, why aren't grants and rebates included in the ROI?
I forgot I muted myself. Sorry. You certainly can, and I think honestly, I'd recommend it up front. But there definitely is some uncertainty regarding the future of rebates, at least in my market. I've seen market decreases in the incentives for lighting, for example. They're getting more and more difficult to get all the time. So I wouldn't say don't do it, but for me, I guess the point I was trying to make is that it's not enough to fund an entire energy program. It's definitely a supplemental piece of funding that can be pursued.
Thank you, Justin. The next question is, so this attendee, they assume there is going to be a lot of work up front if it's a campus-wide scale. If it's a semester-long project and it's done by students, so not full-time employees, what can be done with such limited resources?
So in that case, and I'm assuming these students have some sort of mentor who's got a lot of experience in the industry, I would focus on one building. I'm actually involved in a project right now with, we have a facilities management degree here on campus. A senior project for facilities management is going to be a level 2 energy audit of a local elementary school. So I'd suggest narrowing the scope. With a student group, I wouldn't recommend getting into things like district energy systems, condenser water, chilled water, steam, that kind of thing. Focus on a particular building, I think, is what I'd recommend there.
And just to chime in on that, as some of you guys know, Lucid was founded and we started the company almost 15 years ago now at Oberlin College as a student project. We had a mentor, Professor John Peterson, who helped us start the company. But we really started the company because the work had to continue and we wanted to continue to support the system at Oberlin. But the way we did it is we initially did exactly what Justin said. We focused on 2 buildings to start. We got a $10,000 grant from the EPA. The EPA has a program called P3, People, Prosperity, and the Planet, specifically focused on funding student projects. And so we developed an initial system which showed success. We won a second phase funding from the EPA for $75,000, which gave us the money to instrument another 22 buildings on Oberlin campus that included the submeters, installation, and all the data gateways that got the data to the software. And then at some point it got to the scale where we basically had to make a software company to continue to support what we were doing. But starting with student projects and grant funding is if you don't have other resources, an excellent place to start.
Thank you, both of you. So, Justin, savings calculated in performance period is based on what year utility cost? Is it base year or current year?
So as far as comparisons, we compare to our baseline. That's an average of 2007 to 2009. But every year, so current year, I'm doing energy savings calculations to arrive at a dollar figure. So I guess to answer the question, if I look at my current year and we've got savings in the 1.9 million range, I'm up to about a 44% reduction in energy cost compared to the 3-year baseline.
Thank you. And what is scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 in the graph?
Oh, okay. So this is a way of accounting for your emissions, and there's a lot of information available on it if you'll do a Google search after the webinar. The basics is scope 1 is things that are combustion that occurs on campus. So this is our heat plant, any auxiliary boilers, water heaters, as well as our fleet. Scope 2 is, I kind of think of it as emissions that the university controls directly but are not emitted on campus. For us, that's primarily emissions due to coal-generated electricity. And then scope 3 is kind of everything else. So anything related to the operations of the university, but that you don't have direct control over. For us, that's primarily our commuters.
Thank you, Justin. So, Vladi, can you explain the differences between the Department of Energy's EMIS and the DOE's Energy Star Portfolio Manager and the integration or lack thereof between these two energy management systems? And our attendee is asking these questions because they're required to use Energy Star Portfolio Manager to comply with California's Bill 802. Would you suggest that they also use an EIMS?
Certainly, as far as compliance requirements for reporting to Energy Star Portfolio Manager, you basically, what they're after is the average energy use intensity of the building, so the total kBTU per square foot, and how that's changing over time on a monthly basis, and that obviously scores you against the survey, the CBEX survey that the Department of Energy has done, and tells you how efficient your building is or isn't. And certain jurisdictions have requirements and you have to comply and submit the data, just so you can be scored and you can then make decisions whether it makes sense to invest. We, in fact, built a tool called benchmarkmybuilding.com, also a free tool where you can put in data about a specific building, and then it will tell you not only where it fits on the curve before you go through the process of actually doing the full submittal, but it also will tell you what the financial opportunity is if you improve efficiency in the building, so you know where to focus. An energy information management system, taking a step back, most Energy Star submittals tend to be just monthly data. And so you're looking at monthly trends, which you can get from your bills. Most energy information management systems or energy management information systems can certainly do utility bill data, but they also tend to focus on interval data. So that's data that's coming every 5 or 15 minutes, or smart meter data. In California and other places, we do have somewhat reliable, somewhat accessible smart meter data that we can use. But typically you would install real-time sub-meters that are measuring every minute or every 5 minutes or every 15 minutes the demand of the building and providing that to the EMIS. And the benefit of that is that you can begin to look at when the building is starting up, when the building is shutting down. You can create alerts so that whenever the demand is behaving differently than it used to, then you can go and see that someone did an override and they shouldn't have done it. So you can catch problems very quickly, and you can also optimize the building. It's significantly more valuable. You can unlock a lot more savings. The Lawrence Berkeley National Lab did a study probably about 5 years ago now, and they looked at the savings on average of operational savings that you can get from a building from looking at interval data, and they pinned that number to be 17% on average. So with monthly data, you just can't do that. It doesn't give you the visibility. But if you deploy an energy management information system that can support interval data analytics and integrates with your BMS or individual sub-meters, which is more the trend these days, then you can unlock significantly higher savings, and we highly recommend you do that, because otherwise you'll be leaving savings on the table. So I don't know if that fully answers the question, but let me know if you have any additional follow-ups and can follow up directly.
Thank you, Vladi. Is Lucid planning on showing electrical interval data in 3D modeling?
So in short, we don't have immediate plans to interconnect 3D modeling with energy use data ourselves. That being said, BuildingOS does offer a fully robust API that's in use by a number of customers. Justin mentioned some of the work that he's doing with students from the computer science team that have an interest in the data. And so if you have groups that actually are interested in building that kind of integration, we've done a number of similar integrations, and we highly recommend that type of co-innovation. So please let us know if you have a group that's interested in doing that.
Thank you, Vladi. Back to Justin. So is calculation of the GHG reduction, what coefficient for electric kilowatt hour per metric ton of CO2 are you using? Is it source generation or end use?
I'm afraid I don't know that off the top of my head. That's something that our sustainability division handles. I know that they get the emissions factors from the EPA guidelines, but I'm not certain what our methodology is there. I apologize for not knowing the answer to that question.
Thank you, Justin. And another question for you. So once budget was approved, what factors went into your search for an EMIS solution?
For us up front, it was primarily cost. We did a competitive RFP process, and you know, I'll be honest, Lucid came back with a very competitive bid. If I were to look for one today, there's a number of features that I'd be interested in. Kind of the ease of integration is something I'd be interested in. How you visualize the data. Are there different tools for viewing that kind of thing? And of course, these are all things that Lucid has. Can you set up dashboards, alerts, and that kind of thing? But for us initially, and again, this was 10 years ago, a lot of it came down to just cost, because, you know, we're a budget-driven institution. We're underfunded like most state places are, and we try to be fiscal conservatives.
Thank you, Justin. And just to chime in on top of that, and obviously, you know, my feedback here is obviously biased, but I think one critical thing that for us always comes true is really critical is the ease of use of any solution you buy. So whatever it is, whether it's Lucid or someone else, make sure it's easy to use and intuitive, but also capable. Because if, you know, an energy management information system by itself doesn't automatically deliver savings. It's not like deploying a solar system. It's not like deploying, you know, a chiller upgrade. It enables you to make the right decisions of what to do, where, and how to optimize it and how to run it efficiently. And it allows you to squeeze the most efficiency out of the investments you make. But it does mean that you need to have a resource and a set of folks that are engaged. And so ease of use is a key component of that.
Thank you. So Justin, is the plan to fuel switch to all electric, stop burning natural gas with the expectation of the utility company to green the grid?
I think that's a good general summary. We are moving our campus over to water source variable refrigerant flow on the HVAC side. Right now, we've got about 400,000 square feet, and the EUIs for those buildings are looking fantastic. We're talking low double digits, which is well within the realm of getting to net zero or carbon neutral. The one caveat that I would add, is the expectation of the utility to green the grid. We are producing as much renewable energy on campus as we can. Now, every campus's situation will be a little bit different. In fact, ours among our satellite and our larger campuses are. But for example, here on our main campus, we run our own substation. So I'm going to put as much solar on that substation as it can handle. And then I'll go to the utility. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we're taking as much initiative as we can to not rely on greening of the grid.
Thank you very much. So we have no more questions, but we have a couple of minutes left. So if anyone in our audience still has questions, please do submit them now. And I'll invite you both to provide any other final recommendations, suggestions that you have to our audience. So Justin, would you like to go first?
I think the thing I like to drive home, and I do this at conferences as well, is this idea of what's happening to the energy savings. Because there's a wealth of information out there on how to get there, but what happens to those cash flows can really make or break a program. And I've seen it happen among some of our institutions here in Utah.
And the piece I would chime in, I actually want to go back to the case study I did just 10 minutes ago, which is utilities are a substantial component of any organization's spend. And also, if you zoom out a little bit more and you look at not just utilities, but also the maintenance side, and one of the things we've introduced recently is work order and asset level analytics, the ability to look at maintenance costs and have a full picture of total cost of ownership. The fact that we have a software product and a software tool that lets us manage every other aspect of our operations, and that we don't have that for buildings, that's what's changing, and that's what needs to change. Because when you deploy it, surely you will be able to manage the building footprint, both from a utility cost perspective and a maintenance perspective, much more effectively, and also make the right decisions.
Thank you both. We actually received 2 more questions. They're both for Justin, so maybe we can get through them as well. Justin, does renewable energy include innovative projects as well? And do you have any examples?
Yeah, so for us, there's a handful of categories. Sorry, I'm kind of collecting my thoughts on this. I mentioned solar photovoltaics, and we are pursuing that quite aggressively. One of our satellite campuses is electrically neutral because of a PPA we have. It's an on-site PPA, which is a little interesting and innovative. The other interesting thing about that is we actually negotiated with the company that Weber State owns the RECs, not the power purchase provider. That's a little different. The other thing that we're doing that most people, at least most lay people, aren't familiar with is a large-scale deployment of a district ground source system. I mentioned that we are water-sourced VRF. If there's energy engineers out there, you know that if you're running a heat pump, you still have to get heat from somewhere. And rather than using steam or a hot water system or a boiler, we run our condenser loop water deep underground to where the temperature of the earth is constant year-round, more or less. You can draw it down, you can affect it over time. So that 400,000 square feet of VRF space I just mentioned gets its end heating energy from the deep earth. We've dabbled a little bit in solar thermal. And one of the interesting things we've encountered right now at one of our satellite campuses, it's near an Air Force base. And there's actually a large underground contamination plume that runs right underneath the campus. And as we were discussing the deployment of VRF and ground source on that campus, this issue came up where if we drill, we don't really know what's going to come up, right? And so instead, we're looking at a drain back solar thermal system for heating on that building, which is, I don't know that it's particularly innovative. It's just something that we haven't done before.
Thank you, Justin. And quickly, can you share what data is included in your utility spreadsheet?
Yes. So there's two key components to that. One is kind of a recreation of your utility bill. Okay. So, for example, for natural gas, the top part of my spreadsheet has your connection fee, your decatherms, and then any municipal taxes and the applicable rates. So I recreate our actual utility bill kind of on the top of each tab. And then towards the bottom of each tab, I have the business as usual scenario. So I use current rates and consumption under business as usual, and that comes from the baseline. So we've done it on square footage, and that's a whole different discussion on how you set that up. But for any particular building, I will have a factor of so many kilowatt hours, so many kilowatts, and so many decatherms per square foot. And then I do a comparison between those two to get at the energy savings number.
Thank you so much. And thank you to both of you for sharing all this information with us. Before we conclude today's webinar, I wanted to remind everyone about our next webinar, which will actually kick off a 5-webinar series on STARS data quality. This series will help you gain the insights you need to submit a high-quality STARS report in time for the 2019 Sustainable Campus Index, Princeton Review, and Sierra data sharing deadlines. You can learn more about this webinar and our other professional development offerings on our website. And I hope you'll join us again. Thank you so much to the panelists and to everyone for attending. If you have any additional questions, feel free to contact the presenters directly or ASHI at education@ashi.org. And final reminder that the recording and presentation materials will be available in the Campus Sustainability Hub tomorrow, and you'll receive an email notification once they're uploaded. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.